Oh no, what's going on with this bike? Oh no, what's happening?
Three master mechanics, 4 diagnostic teams, a motorcycle worth more than most houses, dead, and nobody could explain why. Then a homeless girl walked through the gate, knelt beside a $1 million machine in shoes that didn't even match, and said 4 words that made grown men laugh. "Can I try?" 5 minutes later, nobody in that garage was laughing anymore. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. Ryder hadn't said a word in 10 minutes. He stood over the motorcycle with both hands flat on the tank, like he was checking for a pulse that wasn't there. This bike wasn't his work. He hadn't built it. A custom shop with a 3-year waiting list and a reputation nobody questioned had built it. Every weld, every panel, hand-shaped and unrepeatable. People didn't buy a machine like this. They got chosen for one. And inside Ironclad MC, the club Ryder had spent 15 years earning the right to lead. That motorcycle wasn't just metal. It was the proof. Proof that the man wearing the president's patch hadn't built his standing on noise alone. Now it sat dead, silent, and nobody in that garage could tell him why. 3 master mechanics had already failed. 4 diagnostic teams, thousands of dollars in equipment. Every single one of them said the same thing before they walked out the door. This doesn't make sense. Ryder didn't know it yet, but the only person who'd be able to explain it was 3 miles away, checking a vending machine for spare change. Ziva's fingers found nothing in the coin slot. Not today. She didn't react. No sigh, no frustration on her face, just the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on disappointment. Her shoes didn't match. Her backpack strap had torn weeks ago and been fixed with tape that was already failing again. She kept walking anyway, the way she always did, because stopping had never once solved anything. She wasn't asking anyone for help. She'd learned the hard way what happens when you do. Then she turned a corner and stopped. A garage stood ahead of her, bigger than the others on this street. Motorcycles lined outside like they were waiting for something. Men in leather vests stood near the entrance, talking low, arms crossed, the kind of tension that means trouble or means a problem nobody's solved. She didn't know why her feet carried her closer. She just knew that whatever was happening inside that building, it was already pulling at something she recognized. Something she hadn't let herself think about in a long time. 2 strangers, 1 silent machine standing between them. Neither of them had any idea what was about to happen in the next 4 minutes, or that by the end of tonight, one of them would never have to disappear again. It happened on a Sunday charity ride, 11 miles outside town, 50 bikes deep in formation. 1 second the engine was a steady, familiar growl, the same sound that had announced Ryder Vance's arrival at every clubhouse, every rally, every funeral procession for 6 years straight. The next second, nothing. Not a stutter, not a warning cough. Just silence, sudden and complete, like someone had reached into the world and switched it off. Ryder coasted to the shoulder as the pack rode on without him. Engines fading into the distance, one by one, until there was nothing left but wind and gravel under his boots. He sat there a long moment before he even tried the ignition again. Nothing answered him back. The first mechanic took 4 days and called in a second opinion. The second mechanic brought in a diagnostic rig worth more than most cars and stared at the readout like it had personally insulted him. "Fuel system's clean," he said. "Electrical's perfect. I've got nothing telling me this thing should be dead." The third team stripped half the bike down to bare frame, laid every part out on white cloth like evidence at a crime scene, and still came back with the same answer nobody wanted to hear. "We don't know." This wasn't some assembly line machine you could replace with a phone call. This bike had come off the flagship line of a custom builder, so exclusive that owning one wasn't a purchase. It was an invitation. There was no replacement, no backup, no simple swap-it-out fix waiting at a dealership 2 towns over. If this engine didn't come back, neither did the only thing that had ever made Ryder feel unbreakable. 2 weeks passed. The garage stopped feeling like a place of answers and started feeling like a waiting room. People still came by, not to fix it anymore, just to look. Word had spread. The bike that broke every expert who touched it. One by one, even the best in the state walked away shaking their heads. By the 14th evening, Ryder stopped going inside the garage at all. He sat outside instead, on an overturned crate. The metal door rolled halfway up behind him so he could still see the bike sitting in the dim shop light. Quiet now. Cold now. He didn't move for a long time. Didn't check his phone, didn't talk to the 2 men leaning against the wall nearby who knew better than to say anything. He just looked at it. The way you look at someone in a hospital bed when the machines have stopped beeping and nobody's told you anything yet. But you already know. Like he'd lost an old friend. And 3 miles away, a girl was still walking toward that garage, with no idea that the silence inside it was about to become her chance to be seen for the first time in longer than she could remember. Ziva stopped at the open gate, close enough now to hear the voices inside clearly. She stood there a moment, just watching. 3 men in grease-stained shirts circled the motorcycle like doctors who'd run out of diagnoses. Another leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the universal posture of someone who'd already given up but hadn't said so out loud yet. She stepped through the gate. Nobody noticed her right away. Not until she was close enough that one of the mechanics turned, startled, like she'd appeared out of nowhere. "Can I try?" 4 words. Quiet but steady. The mechanic nearest her actually laughed, short and sharp. A kind of laugh that wasn't cruelty exactly, just disbelief finding the fastest way out of his mouth. "You know this bike costs more than most houses around here?" She didn't flinch. "I know." Another one straightened up from where he'd been leaning, wiping his hands on a rag that hadn't been clean in days. He looked her over, the backpack, the mismatched shoes, the kind of look that decides something about a person before they've said a second sentence. "Kid, 3 certified teams couldn't crack this. You think you're gonna walk up and figure out what they missed? My dad had an auto shop." The words came out simple, almost apologetic, like she already expected nobody to believe her. Someone near the back actually laughed at that too, not loud, just enough to make the air in the garage feel a little colder. "Her dad had a shop," he repeated, mostly to the others, like it was the punchline to something. Ziva's eyes dropped to the concrete floor. Her jaw tightened, just barely, the only sign that the laughter had landed somewhere it shouldn't have. "Please," she said, "just 5 minutes." That was when Ryder spoke for the first time since she'd walked in. "You work on motorcycles?" His voice cut through the noise without raising in volume. The mechanics went quiet, almost on instinct, the way men do around someone they've decided to follow. Ziva looked up at him, and for a second neither of them said anything. Everything about Ryder's life had trained him to be careful with trust. 15 years building Ironclad into something other clubs respected and rival clubs feared hadn't happened by saying yes to strangers who wandered through the gate. Control wasn't a habit for him. It was survival. But there was something in the way this girl held herself. Not desperate, not performing, just certain in a way that didn't match anything else about her circumstances. He studied her face longer than the silence was comfortable for anyone else in the room. Then he looked past her. at the bike that 3 experts in 2 weeks had failed to wake up. What did he actually have left to lose? Ryder stepped to the side, clearing the path to the motorcycle. 5 minutes, he said. One of the mechanics started to object, mouth already opening. But Ryder's glance silenced him before a single word came out. Ziva didn't say thank you. She didn't smile. She just walked toward the bike like she'd already stopped hearing anyone else in the room, like the only conversation left was between her and the machine nobody else could reach. 5 minutes. That was all she'd asked for. Ziva knelt beside the motorcycle, and for a long moment, she didn't do anything at all. No tools, no rush to prove herself in the 5 minutes she'd been given. She simply rested her hands on her knees and listened, the way someone listens to a person who's hurt and hasn't said why yet. Behind her, one of the mechanics shifted his weight, impatient, glancing at Ryder like he expected this whole thing to end before it began. Ryder didn't move. He kept watching her, the same careful attention he gave anything that might cost him something if he got it wrong. Ziva leaned closer to the engine, tilting her head slightly, as if the silence coming off it told her something the diagnostic machines never could. Her father used to do this, long before any of this, long before any of it had been taken from her. She remembered standing in his shop watching him do exactly this, hands still, head tilted, listening to a machine the way other people listen to a heartbeat. She reached out and touched a single wire, just resting 2 fingers against it, not pulling, not testing anything yet, just feeling. Then her hand moved lower, toward a connector tucked behind the housing, the kind of place a rushed inspection skips because it looks fine from a glance. She pressed it gently, held it there. Something in her expression shifted. Small. Almost nothing. But it was there. She reached further underneath the engine, into a space most of the room couldn't even see clearly from where they stood. Her arm disappearing past the wrist, her face turned slightly away in concentration. Nobody in the garage spoke. Even the mechanic who'd been ready to object a minute ago had gone still, arms uncrossed now, watching despite himself. Her fingers found something. She didn't say what it was, didn't pull it free to show anyone. She simply adjusted it, slow and deliberate, the way you'd reset something that had been wrong for so long nobody remembered it was supposed to sit differently. Then she drew her hand back, wiped it once against her jeans, and stood. Try now. 2 words. No explanation offered, no confidence performed for the room. Just a quiet certainty that didn't ask anyone to believe her, only to test it. Ryder hesitated for exactly 1 breath. Then he stepped to the bike, swung his leg over the seat the way he had 1,000 times before this thing went silent, and turned the ignition. For half a second, nothing happened, and the old dread started crawling back into the room. Then the engine caught. It didn't sputter. It didn't hesitate or stall the way it had during every failed attempt over the last 2 weeks. It came alive in 1 clean, deep breath, the sound rolling through the garage like something returning home. Nobody laughed now. Nobody spoke at all. Ryder sat there with the engine running beneath him, staring straight ahead at nothing. And the only sound in that entire garage was the bike he'd thought he'd lost, breathing again, like it had never stopped. One of the mechanics finally moved, snapping out of whatever stillness had taken the room. He stepped to the side panel, pulled it open with hands that were shaking slightly more than he probably wanted anyone to notice, and looked underneath. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said it out loud, mostly to himself. "It's the grounding bracket." He turned it over in his fingers, holding up something so small it looked almost insulting next to the size of the problem it had caused. A bracket, loosened just enough by the vibration of 6 years of riding that the connection had been failing slowly, intermittently, in a way no scanner had been built to catch. A 30-cent part. Sitting underneath a housing nobody had thought to check by hand, because every test they ran said the electrical system was fine. It was fine. Until it wasn't, in the one place none of them had physically touched. Ryder climbed off the bike slowly, the engine still running behind him, and looked at Ziva for a long moment before he spoke. "How did you know?" She looked down at her hands first, like the question cost her something to answer honestly. "My dad used to say expensive problems usually begin with cheap mistakes." Nobody laughed at that. Nobody had laughed in several minutes now. Ryder waited. He didn't fill the silence the way some men do when they're uncomfortable with quiet. He just let it sit there, giving her room. "What's your name?" A pause. "Ziva. And your dad's shop, where is it?" Her eyes dropped again, and this time her voice came out smaller. "He passed away." One of the mechanics, the same one who'd laughed at her 20 minutes earlier, quietly set his wrench down on the workbench. He didn't say anything. He just stopped moving entirely, like he understood now that he'd missed something far more important than a grounding bracket. "My mom tried to keep the shop going after," Ziva said. "She fought for it as long as she could." Her voice caught slightly on the next part. "She got sick, then she died too." The garage had gone completely still. Even the men by the wall, who rarely stood still for anything, had stopped shifting their weight, stopped glancing at each other, stopped doing anything except listening. "My uncle took over everything after that," she continued. "The shop, what was left of it. He had debt of his own, more than anyone realized." She wrapped her arms around herself slightly, an old, practiced gesture, like she'd told herself this part of the story enough times to know exactly how much it would hurt before she said it. "One night, he told me someone was willing to clear that debt if I agreed to go with them." Nobody asked her to clarify what that meant. Nobody needed to. "I left that night," she said. "Just took my bag and left." She gave a small, tired smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Been sleeping wherever I can since." The garage stayed silent for a long moment after that. The kind of silence that isn't empty. The kind that means everyone in the room is recalculating something about the person standing in front of them. Ryder looked at her, then at the engine still running steady behind him. The sound that had defined his world for 6 years, now filling a silence that had nothing left to do with the motorcycle at all. The garage stayed quiet a while longer. The kind of quiet that follows something true being said out loud for the first time. Then one of the older members, a heavy-set man named Dutch, who'd been with Ironclad longer than most of the others combined, walked toward the small fridge in the corner without a word. He came back with a sandwich still wrapped in its plastic, set it on the workbench near Ziva, and went right back to fiddling with a toolbox like it was nothing. "You look like you skipped lunch," he said, not looking at her. "Figured I'd skip mine too. Bad habit, eating alone." It wasn't kindness performed for the room. It wasn't a moment anyone made a show of. He just did it the way men like him did most things, sideways, without ceremony, like making a fuss over it would somehow undo the gesture. Ziva looked at the sandwich, then at him, and said nothing for a second. "Thank you," she said quietly. Dutch shrugged like it cost him nothing, though everyone in that garage understood exactly what it meant coming from him. One of the younger mechanics, the same one who doubted her loudest 20 minutes earlier, scratched the back of his neck and muttered something close to an apology without quite managing the actual words. Nobody pushed him to finish it. Some things you let a man arrive at on his own time. Ryder stood near the bike, arms crossed, watching all of it unfold with an expression that had softened considerably since she'd first walked through the gate. "You know what you did in here today," he said. It wasn't a question. Ziva looked up at him, uncertain. "It was simple," she said. "Anyone could have found it if they'd checked by hand." Ryder shook his head slowly. "No. 3 certified teams stood right where you're standing and missed it. You didn't fix that bike because you got lucky. You fixed it because you listened when everyone else trusted a machine to tell them the truth." He paused, letting that settle. "You walked in here looking like you didn't belong, and you reminded every single person in this room that skill doesn't wear expensive clothes." Nobody argued with him. Nobody in that garage was in a position to. For a few minutes, something in the room felt almost light. Someone laughed at something Dutch said. Another mechanic asked Ziva, half joking, if she wanted a job. And for the first time that evening, she actually smiled, small and real. But Ryder kept watching her a little longer than the conversation around them required. Because somewhere underneath the warmth settling over the garage, one fact hadn't changed since she'd first walked through that gate. She still had nowhere to go tonight. No address, no bed waiting, no version of this evening that ended somewhere safe once the garage door rolled shut and everyone went home. And as the laughter in the room continued without him, Ryder found himself doing the one thing he hadn't expected to be doing tonight. He was trying to figure out what happened to her next. It was Dutch who made the call. Not out of suspicion, not out of doubt about anything Ziva had said, but because 15 years in Ironclad had taught him that good intentions without information were how people got hurt twice. He knew a man, retired from the kind of work that involved finding paper trails other people had tried to bury. And by the next afternoon, that man had something for him. He laid it out on the workbench in front of Ryder, 3 sheets of paper that didn't look like much until you read what was actually written on them. "Her uncle," Dutch said. "Name's Halvern Cobb. He didn't just take over the shop after her mother died." Ryder picked up the first page, scanning it slowly. "He filed paperwork 2 months before her mother passed," Dutch continued. "Transfer of ownership. Signed." "Her mother signed that?" Dutch shook his head once. "Her mother was in a hospital bed by that point. Barely conscious, according to the nurse's notes my guy pulled. That signature doesn't match anything else she ever signed in her life." Ryder set the page down slowly, the kind of stillness that meant something was building behind his expression rather than settling. "There's more," Dutch said. "Cobb's debt didn't disappear when Ziva left that night. If anything, it got worse. And paperwork like this, forged ownership, doesn't just sit quiet forever. Sooner or later, he's going to need that shop, or whatever's left of it, to pay off the people he owes. Which means he comes looking for her." "Which means he comes looking for her," Dutch repeated. Neither man said anything for a moment. Outside the office, the sound of the motorcycle's engine, still running, occasionally drifted through the wall, club members taking turns listening to it, like they couldn't quite believe it was real yet. Ryder thought about the girl currently asleep on a cot in the back room. The first real sleep she'd probably had in longer than either of them wanted to guess, completely unaware that her uncle's name had just landed on a workbench 3 rooms away. "If he finds out where she is," Ryder said slowly, "what's stopping him from showing up here?" Dutch didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. Both men already knew the honest answer wasn't comforting. Then Dutch's phone buzzed on the table between them, screen lighting up with a number neither of them recognized. He looked at it for a long second before answering. Hello. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, low and careful, asking a question that made Dutch's expression change completely. I'm looking for a girl. Goes by Ziva. You seen her around? Dutch ended the call without giving anything away. No name confirmed, no location mentioned. Just enough vague non-answers to buy time before he hung up and looked at Ryder across the workbench. Neither man said anything for a while after that. Ryder walked outside alone, past the bike still parked exactly where it had come back to life, and stood near the open garage door, looking out at the dark street beyond it. This wasn't his fight. He kept turning that thought over, testing it, the way you test a part you suspect might be cracked, even though it looks fine on the surface. She wasn't club. She wasn't family. She'd walked through his gate that afternoon, a stranger, fixed something nobody else could, and by every reasonable measure, what happened to her next wasn't his responsibility to carry. But he kept thinking about the way she'd said his name when she found that bracket. Not proud, not looking for credit, just quietly certain, the same way she'd talked about her father, like skill was the only inheritance nobody had managed to take from her yet. If he stepped into this, really stepped in, lawyers, pressure on Cobb, the full weight of everything Ironclad had built over 15 years, there was no quiet way to undo that decision once it was made. A club like his didn't get involved in something halfway. He stood there a long time, hands in his pockets, the cold settling into his shoulders, before he finally exhaled and walked back inside. In the back room, Ziva lay awake on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of voices she couldn't quite make out through the wall. She'd heard enough fragments to understand something had shifted. A phone call, a name mentioned in passing through the door that hadn't quite closed all the way. She didn't need the rest of the conversation to know what it probably meant. This was the part she knew best, the part where things start to feel steady, and then they don't. She thought about leaving, just slipping out the side door before anyone noticed, the way she'd done a dozen times in a dozen places that it started to feel briefly, dangerously safe. It would be easier. It always had been before. Leaving first meant nobody got the chance to leave her. But some small, stubborn part of her kept returning to the way Dutch had set that sandwich down without making her feel small for needing it. The way Ryder had looked at her after the engine started, like what she'd done actually mattered, not just to him, but to everyone watching. She sat up slowly, wrapping her arms around her knees in the dark. Maybe staying wasn't the mistake it had always been before. Or maybe she was about to learn the same lesson all over again. She didn't know yet which it would be. She only knew that, for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to find out. The rebuild took 2 months. Ironclad showed up most weekends, not because anyone asked them twice, but because somewhere along the way, then this had stopped being a favor and started being something closer to family business. Dutch handled the wiring personally, insisting on checking every connection by hand. A quiet joke between him and Ziva that neither of them needed to explain to anyone else. The morning of the opening, the street outside the shop filled with more motorcycles than it had probably ever seen in one place. Word travels fast in those circles, and the story of the girl who fixed what nobody else could had traveled further than anyone expected. Someone hung the new sign just before the doors opened, and for a moment the whole street went quiet, watching it rise into place. It didn't say her father's name. It didn't say Ryder's or Ironclad's or anyone else who'd had a hand in getting her here. Ziva Custom Garage. Just that. When the doors finally opened, the noise that followed felt like the exact opposite of the silence that had filled that first garage weeks earlier. Engines starting up one after another outside, voices, laughter, the kind of sound that means something is alive again, instead of something being mourned. Ryder found her near the back of the shop, away from most of the crowd, and held something out to her without saying anything at first. A key? She looked at it for a long moment before she took it, turning it over once in her palm like she still wasn't fully convinced it was real. "You did all this for me?" Ryder shook his head slowly. "No." He looked around at the shop, the sign outside, the crowd still gathering near the open doors. "You already built this. The day nobody believed in you, and you fixed what every single one of them had already given up on." Ziva held the key a little tighter, glancing once toward the door where the noise of the crowd kept building, then back at him. "I didn't think anyone was going to stay," she said quietly. "I know," Ryder said. "That's why we did." Outside, the sound of engines kept rising, steady and full, filling a street that had been silent for far too long. And for the first time since she'd walked through that gate with nothing but a torn backpack and a stranger's certainty, Ziva wasn't going anywhere. If this story moved you, tell us where you stood. Comment Ziva's Garage, so we know you made it to the end. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Ordinary people who turn out to carry something extraordinary nobody bothered to look for. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to be seen. We'll see you in the next one.